If you'd asked me if I ever thought I'd be sitting in a doctor's clinic waiting to find out if I was pregnant or not, I'd have laughed in your face. No 14-year-old ever wants to be in that kind of situation, and yet that's exactly where I found myself. It was one of those bright spring days, and I had to look at my feet because the sun was shining directly into my eyes. And, okay, I'll admit it, I was nervous. I looked up, squinting slightly, and the doctor was standing there, staring at me. He looked nervous too. Did that mean I really was pregnant? Sweat began to trickle down my back, and I could feel my skin burning up. He asked me to follow him into the room, and without even looking at me, asked me to sit down. Avril, I'm afraid I have some bad news. Hot tears were prickling in my eyes as he told me that. And then I was stopped in my tracks. It appears that you are suffering from a rare hormonal disorder. Although you are only 14, according to your test results, you are in fact biologically closer to the age of 63. What this means is that I didn't hear anything else he said. What did he mean? The room was spinning and I felt like I was going to pass out. 63? 63 years old? Wait, did that mean I wasn't pregnant? I must have started crying because the next thing I knew, the doctor was sitting next to me, telling me it was going to be okay, and that there were researchers who specialized in this kind of disorder. I couldn't believe I'd thought I was pregnant, when, in fact, this was pretty much the opposite news. He went on to explain that I'd basically undergone early menopause, and that was why I was no longer getting my period, and had been experiencing these hot flushes. Even at that moment, as he told me all of this, I was experiencing my worst hot flush to date. I felt like someone had dipped me into a fire. That's how much I was sweating and burning up. He told me I should have brought a parent or guardian with me because legally I couldn't pick up the medicine he wanted to prescribe me without an adult. Everything he said to me was so confusing, and all I wanted was to run away. Why couldn't I be normal like every other girl my age? It's crazy when I think about it because when I first got my period, I thought I was dying. And I remember saying to my friend Jessie that I wished I would never have another one. That's how painful it was. It felt like I was bleeding to death. And yet, as I walked away from the doctor's clinic, all I wanted was to get my period. Things could change so fast, and I cursed myself for wishing them away like that. Worse than hearing that I would never have children was the fact I had to tell my mom. I mean, without her, I wouldn't be able to get the hormone replacement pills. But what difference would they make anyway? I was a freak. How did my life come to this? A couple of months ago, I was just a normal teenage girl, complaining about school, crushing on boys, and hanging out with my friends. And now I was some old woman trapped in a young girl's body. Nothing could be worse than this, I told myself as I walked home, trying to drown out my feelings with loud music playing in my ears. And to think I'd been so naive to believe that I was pregnant. I mean, get a grip, Avril. I had put off going to the doctor for so long because I was so paranoid about it. The weird symptoms I'd been having started about 6 months ago. At first, my period disappeared. Then I started sweating a lot, and I could barely sleep because I just felt hot all the time, even in the middle of winter. I thought it was all in my head, but the more I thought about it, the more my body felt different inside. I stupidly mentioned it to Jessie one weekend when she was staying over, and she was like, "Avril, maybe you're pregnant." My cousin told me this story where a girl went swimming with some boys and she got pregnant. Like, for reals. I just laughed. I mean, come on. No one gets pregnant from that, right? Well, sooner or later, I started to believe it. I Googled my symptoms and everything pointed to pregnancy. I didn't want to go out and buy a test because I was sure the lady in the pharmacy would judge me. So that's why I went to see the doctor. I don't know what news I would have preferred, to be pregnant or this. When I got home, my mom's car was in the driveway. I had to pretend I'd been at school, even though I'd snuck out at lunchtime for my appointment. I walked in, my heart pounding with fear. What if she could tell something was wrong? Luckily for me, she was on a call, and so I slipped up to my room without her so much as even noticing. Once inside, I sank onto my bed and cried. I cried for how awful I felt, how scared I was to tell my mom, and then what about my friends? What would they even think of me? Suddenly, something I hadn't even thought of flickered through my head. Was I going to die? The doctor had said I was biologically similar to that of a 63-year-old. So what? Was I going to die in like 10 to 15 years? I wanted to punch something. This wasn't fair. I was only 14 years old. I had my whole life ahead of me, or at least so I thought. That night, I didn't even want to eat. I felt so empty inside. And I guess I was empty, right? There were no babies in there, no eggs waiting to become babies one day. I might as well be dead. I closed my eyes and climbed under the covers. I knew I wouldn't sleep, but maybe if I slept, I'd wake up and realize this was just one big horrible nightmare, and I was actually a normal girl after all. 5 minutes later, my mom's voice echoed through the house. I tried to block it out, but then I realized she was calling me. I really didn't want to deal with whatever problem she had right now, but if I didn't go down, she'd just continue to shout. My mom was pretty highly strung, being a single mom and having a busy job. She didn't exactly have the easiest time. I went downstairs, quickly glancing in the mirror to make sure my eyes weren't too swollen from all the crying. She was waiting at the bottom of the stairs and she had this manic look in her eyes. Had she been drinking? I knew she drank a lot these days due to stress, but this was something more. As she shouted at me, she almost spat. "Why on earth would you think it's okay to skip school, young lady? A little birdie told me she saw you at the doctor's clinic. What have you got to say about that? Something you're not telling me, is there?" I just stared at her. She had her hands on her hips and suddenly I felt so small and helpless. In a small voice, I told her I didn't want to talk about it. I expected her to leave me be, but instead she grabbed me by the arm and dragged me through to the lounge. "Tell me what's wrong right now or you're grounded," she yelled at me. "Mom, well, it's complicated." Then I burst into tears. Through my heaving sobs, I told her how I wasn't able to have kids, that I'd gone to the doctor because I'd been feeling weird. I didn't tell her the part about where I thought I'd been pregnant. She would have killed me. I then went on to explain that I needed her to sign something so that I could take hormone replacement pills for my menopause. "Menopause? You what? You mean I'll never be a grandma? You are a disgrace. What is wrong with you?" And at that, she also burst into tears. I couldn't believe her. I just told her I had some weird disorder, and all she was concerned about was that she wouldn't ever be a grandma. I ran to my room and slammed the door. My mom was acting like the most selfish person in the world. How was I even related to her? Later that night, there was a knock on my door. It was my mom. I didn't want to see her, but she came in anyway. She was still crying, and she started apologizing, saying it was her fault and that she felt so guilty. I didn't understand. She said that during the pregnancy with me, she had continued to drink, even though she knew it was wrong, and maybe she was somehow responsible for the disorder I had. I turned to her and told her to stop it. It wasn't her fault. The doctor said this was a rare disorder, but it was no one's fault. It just happened, and unfortunately, I was one of the unlucky ones. I knew there was no point in holding a grudge with Mom. I could die soon, I thought, and that's when I realized I couldn't live like this. I needed more information. The next day, Mom and I went to see the doctor, and he explained everything. I would need to take the hormone pills for the rest of my life. When he said this, I interrupted him and said, "Oh, what, you mean for the next 10 years? Because I'm going to die then, aren't I?" Both the doctor and my mom stared at me in horror, and then the doctor actually laughed. "Die?" he said. Avril, no dear. This is a serious hormone issue, but you aren't going to die. Yes, biologically you are 63, but you will still live to be a ripe old lady. And who knows, by the time you're 20, there might be some miracle cure to solve this. Don't give up hope. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one with empty ovaries and the prospect of a future without kids. I felt like I'd been forced to grow up. I'd gone from being carefree to someone who had skipped womanhood. I was old inside. No one would ever want to date me. I'd be the laughingstock at school. As if being a teenager wasn't already challenging enough. I was grateful Mom was there because she appeared to understand more than I did. The doctor asked us to wait outside for my prescription to be ready and asked me to come see him again in 1 month's time. We waited in silence. The doctor was seeing another patient and he told us he wouldn't be long. After about 10 minutes, the door opened and an old lady shuffled out. She looked at me and smiled and said, "Chin up, dearie. Life can't be that bad, can it? Look at me. I'm 89 and I'm dying, but hey, I'm still smiling." I blinked and just nodded at her. I closed my eyes for a second and tried to gather my thoughts. When I opened them, she was gone, and Mom was standing there with her hand out. "Come on, love, let's get your medicine and get you home. You're going to be okay, I promise." And I believed her. At that moment, I believed her. I knew I'd be okay, because honestly, there is always someone out there who is dealing with something much worse than you are. Besides, I'm still too young to think about babies. I mean, I'm sure that in 15 years I can adopt a baby, or maybe they'll find a cure. Maybe even men would be able to give birth. Anyway, who knows what will happen? And from that day onwards, I decided to adopt an attitude like that old lady had. Life really isn't that bad, right? What do you think of my story? Please share your comments and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories.